Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
Hey everyone, since we first aired this episode, we have to notify you that the state legislature has passed this bill talked about on air. With this bill passing, developers will be able to build faster and cheaper due to cuts in some regulation on wetlands. Builders will no longer be financially incentivized to construct around wetlands, but developers can still choose to avoid building on wetlands or pay for mitigation, but they now have the option to build over many wetlands without informing the state. We'll be talking about more of this later this week in our call-in show on Thursdays. Be ready to call with any questions or comments you may have on this. I'm Khalil A. Kulona, and this is Nashville. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about wetlands, the extraordinary ecosystems that straddle the wet and the dry. The term wetlands is given to a variety of habitats, from forest swamps along rivers to marshes, bogs, and even patches of spongy oil with no obvious connection to water. Now, wetlands cover just 3% of Tennessee land, but they are home to a highly concentrated amount of plants and animals. They play a very important role in maintaining biodiversity, reducing water pollution, and weakening flooding in our state. Tennessee has already lost about 60% of its historically known wetlands, mostly due to cleared land for agriculture. We have state laws that protect some of these habitats, but last year, Tennessee lawmakers considered an effort to deregulate wetlands to benefit developers. In essence, it would provide short-term financial benefits to developers. Now, that legislation ended up stalling in committee. However, lawmakers are likely to consider it again. Now, here to tell us more about this unique and valuable ecological resource are Dr. Justin Murdoch, an ecologist and associate professor of biology at Tennessee Tech University, and Grace Strantz, the CEO of the Harpeth Conservancy. Justin and Grace, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having us.
Okay, so I want to get to some of the basics. Justin, what is the definition of a wetland?
Well, that's actually a pretty easy thing to answer and a very complicated thing to answer all at the same time.
Okay.
So basically a wetland is an area that stays wet for an extended period of time. So the definition is basically an area that has water above it or just below the surface for either all year or for long enough to cause changes to the soil and the vegetation around it. And there are really three aspects that are looked at to define if a certain area is a wetland. The first of that is the hydrology or the hydraulic regime, how often water stays on an area. The second is the soil properties, because as water stays on an area for a long period of time, it starts changing what's in the soil. So it starts to leach out some of the metals and the minerals, and kind of you get a buildup of organic matter. So there's certain properties we look for. And then there's the vegetation, and we look for hydrophytic vegetation or water-loving vegetation that can withstand the roots being submerged for long periods of time.
All right. That's pretty simple and complicated, as you said. Mm-hmm. There are different types of wetlands in various regions. What types of wetlands do we have here in Tennessee?
Well, you did a really good job in your intro explaining the main types that we have, and they vary considerably from the west to the east side of the state. So in the western part of the state, where most of our wetlands are, we have a lot of the bottomland hardwood forested swamplands. And then as we move across the state, we have some what's called shrub wetlands, which are mainly small woody vegetation and some grasses. And then we have wet meadows, which are water areas that are predominantly grasses and sedges. And then as we move up into higher elevations in East Tennessee, we can even have some more of our high elevation mountain bogs, which are kind of more peaty accumulation, like you might think in the Northeast, similar to those.
What about here in Nashville? What do we have in Nashville as far as wetlands are concerned?
As far as wetlands in Nashville, we have a lot of the scrub shrub wetlands as well as the wet meadows. Some spots of forested wetlands as well. Maybe not quite as many as we do have out in West Tennessee, but there are pockets of those.
All right. One type of wetland that's caused a lot of confusion, from what I understand, is called a geographically isolated wetland. Explain what that is to us.
Again, it can be a little bit complicated, but for the most part, what a geographically isolated wetland is, it's a wetland that does not have a direct surface connection to a stream channel, and so it is kind of away from the normal flow of water as we see water flowing through a basin. And it can be, a few hundred yards away from a stream, or it can be, a quarter mile or more, kind of in the upslope areas. It's something that doesn't have a direct surface water connection, but it connects to these waterways in a lot of different ways.
Now, the state says about half of our isolated wetlands are less than 1 acre in size, and nearly 80% are less than 4 acres. So explain how we know if small area is actually a wetland, and what makes these small wetlands important.
Well, in order to really define a place as a wetland is to go back to those three characteristics that I kind of brought up a little bit earlier, was the soil and the vegetation and the hydraulic regime. I mean, those are the standard definitions of going in there and looking to see, do we meet conditions that we would expect to have in a wetland? And so that's how we say if something is a wetland or not. And I think that that's something that is commonly done through a process called wetland delineation. And there's a lot of people that are trained in wetland delineation, both state and in private consulting firms. And it's a really big part of this whole wetland mitigation, wetland restoration kind of aspects that we're dealing with in the state.
Now, Grace, tell me this: why are isolated wetlands significant in Middle Tennessee?
So in Middle Tennessee, we have a karst landscape. And what that means is we have a ton of sinkholes and caves because we have a lot of limestone. And this limestone is very porous. So the rainwater comes in, it seeps down and creates these giant caves. In fact, Tennessee has more caves than anywhere else in the entire United States. And why that matters when we're talking about these geographically isolated wetlands is because our water very regularly goes underground and comes back up. So it would make a lot of sense that a lot of these wetlands won't have those over-the-ground connections. And once they go underground, it doesn't count. Although, obviously, ecologically, we understand that they are still connected. Now,
are Tennessee wetlands unique in any way compared to like other wetlands across the world?
Yeah, there's always an yes to that answer, right? I mean, this is Tennessee. We have a lot of special things here aquatic-wise. So you can say yes, and if you need me, I can fill in.
Yeah, I mean, I think our wetlands. Yeah, Justin, I'm gonna let you take this one. I mean, I would say like ecologically, we're the most biodiverse hotspot in all of North America, third in the world, and so those wetlands are part and parcel to why we have the unique biodiversity.
Yeah, you don't need my help. You're exactly right. I mean, that's one of the things about Tennessee is we are one of the most aquatically biodiverse areas in the country, if not the world. And so these wetlands are really critical at cleaning and purifying the water as it flows across the landscape, as it enters into these streams and rivers and lakes and reservoirs that are housing all of these vast diverse of species. So the connection between the wetlands and the rivers and the streams and the lakes and the groundwater, is critical. And that's one thing I always kind of teach to get across to all my students is the connections. Water flows downhill, and so what's going through a wetland uphill is affecting the water quality downstream and downhill, and a lot of the species that we have, particularly like in Nashville, thinking about things like streamside salamanders that require good water quality, and in those particular species live up in the higher elevations that they need sustained water flow at the right times, and the wetlands help mitigate the flow and keep it consistently flowing in those streams to help keep all of these species kind of going even when there are other stressors that are affecting them.
All right, so this next question I'd love for both of you to answer. Grace, you first. What was one of the coolest or more interesting things that you've learned or experienced about wetlands that really kind of either surprised you or captured your imagination?
Ooh, that's so hard because wetlands capture my imagination every day. I think I did not realize how interconnected wetlands are with our rivers. And as someone who grew up on a lot of our rivers and now work in rivers, I feel like this legislation really opened my eyes to how interconnected the system is with them. And so I think, the fact that they recharge them, they hold our water, they slow the flow. Oh, actually, I'm gonna back it up. I did not know that wetlands filtered out PFAS and PFOAs from the environment. And I think, with these emerging contaminants, I think they're so interesting as we're discovering the science behind them. So to find out that wetlands naturally get rid of these from our rivers and drinking water is pretty incredible.
You said you grew up around rivers?
Yeah, I grew up in Nashville. I'm a Nashville native. So I grew up playing on the Harpeth River and, spending a lot of times in wetlands too, sometimes, as Justin was saying, there's so many different types. You could be playing on a wetland and not even realize that it's a wetland.
James? Justin, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Usually people call me Jason, so I answer to any J thing nowadays.
Okay. So what was one of the most interesting things you've discovered?
So we would do a lot of research in wetland restoration in West Tennessee, particularly agriculturally restored wetlands. And one of the things that was really amazing to me was finding out like how quickly restored wetlands can start behaving like wetlands again, right? So I mean, within a couple of years. And again, my work is focused mainly on the water quality, biogeochemical, nutrient retention side of things. And these wetlands can start being really effective at cleaning the water, taking out sediment, nutrients, pesticides, even things like PFAS and microplastics, those things really, really quickly. And so even though the biodiversity may lag behind in kind of returning, even though that can return fairly quickly, the ecosystem services related to purifying water return really quick.
Okay, so how valuable are our wetlands? I mean, they're valuable in every way as a natural resource and as well for our economy.
Yeah, so there have been a lot of different numbers for that. Some people say 7,000. We've heard actual numbers up to 49,000 per acre of the services that they provide for all of our communities.
That's something.
It's a lot of money.
It's a big chunk
to get rid of.
So do you think the state, like we, the people of the state, as well as our legislators, do you think we understand how valuable our wetlands are?
I think that many legislators understand the value of our wetlands, and I think that's why they sent this to a summer study. We work with Republicans and Democrats, and I hear constantly from many of them how much they value the wetlands and understand that they're not going to be able to kayak, they're not going to be able to hunt on them. If they're gone, it's going to have a huge impact on our economy. But I don't think all of them understand the value. And so I think part of our goal and why I'm so happy to be here today is that we're able to inform the public and let them know, like, hey, these are really, really valuable. And when they're gone, they're gone.
And speaking about that value, we're doing a lot of developing in Nashville, Middle Tennessee, and in other parts of the state. So if wetlands are developed, can we ever get them back? Or are they permanently gone?
There is a large effort towards wetland restoration in the state. A lot of that's led by the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service that are working on through the Wetlands Reserve Program. And what that does is basically take marginal farmland that may be in lowland areas that gets flooded out a lot and return that back to wetlands. And so I think that there is a huge effort in bringing back wetlands within the state and seeing what kind of benefits that we can get from those restorations. It's been really, really effective. There's no shortage of people wanting to get into that program because they see how much once the wetlands come back, then the animals come back, then the ability for recreation comes back. The waterfowl hunting, the deer hunting is improved dramatically in that area. The biodiversity returns. The return of some of the animals that we thought were lost start to come back. So the effort is there within the state, and I think that there's a momentum for it to keep going in that direction.
I'm curious about this. You either of you may not have the answer to this, but how much does it cost to restore a wetland that's been developed?
Totally depends, and I don't have a great answer for that, but one of the things that from our research that what we're finding is really the main thing for getting a wetland to come back is reintroducing the water. If you reintroduce the water, Mother Nature kind of takes over and does a lot of the heavy lifting, in getting things to come back and the vegetation to come back. and the animals and the organisms and the microbes to come back to do that. So it can be minimal, or it can be, hundreds of thousands of dollars of dirt work, or a big in West Tennessee. West Tennessee, for example, tree planting to try to get it back to the bottom of the hardwood forest is really important, and that can be pretty expensive to put all of those trees in there. But for the most part, the benefits of the investment come back.
So I'm going to ask this question before we go to break. People who are listening, they may be curious about the wetlands around. Whoever's listening, they want to go out and experience them. Where would each of you tell them to go, and what should we be keeping in mind when we do go walking through a wetland?
Yeah, I would say go to Shelby Bottoms. It's in East Nashville. You can have a really awesome lunch or coffee at one of the amazing restaurants nearby. And then it's a fantastic park, and you get to see what a wetland looks like in the middle of a city. And I think that's really exciting. And I go there pretty regularly. And there is really good bird watching there. So all you ornithologists or want to be ornithologists, you should check out Shelby Bottoms if you haven't been there before.
Justin?
Well, I don't really have a specific place in mind. There's a lot of great ones. But I mean, there are so many wetlands all over the state that, they can basically go outside their door and probably within 10 or 15 minutes find a small wetland somewhere. And there are maps where you can locate those. And then just go to those places and take a seat and look down at the water, look at the plants, look at the insects coming out, the dragonflies. Maybe there's some fish or some salamanders in there. And just kind of look at how everything works together and is connected together. And I think that any and all wetlands have some kind of peaceful value to sit by them and see and just kind of enjoy them.
And don't litter.
Don't litter.
No, that's
responsible.
That's right. Yeah. All right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation by turning our attention to legislation that seeks to lift protections on wetlands here in Middle Tennessee. Stay with us. This is Nashville. How do y'all feel?
Funding for This is Nashville comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
I'm Khalil A. Kulona, and this is Nashville. Welcome back. Today we're having a conversation about wetlands here in Tennessee. Now, wetlands are incredibly rich biodiverse ecosystems comparable to rainforests or coral reefs. They thread through our state. Now, wetlands help us to maintain clear water and mitigate flooding. Still with us are Justin Murdoch, Associate Professor of Biology at Tennessee Tech University, and Grace Stranch. She is the CEO of the Harpeth Conservancy, a nonprofit based in Brentwood, Tennessee. Again, thank you both for being here with us and teaching us about these valuable wetlands. Now, early last year, WPLN environmental reporter Caroline Eggers reported on legislation that Tennessee lawmakers considered that threatened protections for Tennessee's wetlands. Let's take a listen to that report.
I'm walking slowly in Shelby Bottoms Park. It feels like I'm walking on a sponge, squeezing water from the ground with every step. I see an open field near me, and there's also a little pond-like feature. And I'm in the in-between. I'm in a wetland. Its most basic definition is soil that is at least periodically saturated or covered by water. These damp environments grow unique plant species, and they're one of the most biodiverse habitats on Earth. Wetlands cover an estimated 6% of the planet's land, but provide habitat to 40% of all plant and animal species. Historically, agriculture was their main threat, but a new bill would put more than half of Tennessee's remaining wetlands in the path of construction.
There are resources that need to be protected, but I'll tell you what doesn't need to be protected.
Representative Kevin Vaughn is a developer and the bill's sponsor. Most of the lawmakers involved in the bill work in the same industry, like co-sponsor Representative Jeff Burkhart He's the former president of the Tennessee State Home Builders Association. But Vaughn is the man in front of the microphone. During a hearing at the state capitol this month, he spoke about his emotional experiences with water regulations in his job.
That's something that just kind of just makes me want to bow up. That's the origins of where this bill came from.
In its original form, Vaughn's bill would have taken away all state regulations for developers on many types of wetlands. If the bill passes, experts say it would provide short-term profit for a small number of people and long-lasting harm to communities and ecosystems.
You've got cost to a private entity, whoever that is, and then you've got benefits that are to the entire public.
Alan Lyserson is a retired attorney with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, the agency that handles wetland permits. In a perfect world, no wetlands would ever be drained. Lyserson says the current compromise is that the state at least identifies wetlands to create a plan before developers build.
The way a regulatory program works, you need to have the whole scope.
Back in 2019, a company Vaughn worked with got caught by state regulators for draining and filling a wetland without a permit. It's one example of at least 4 development projects that Vaughn has been affiliated with in recent years. Each involved wetlands, and collectively, those projects could have saved upwards of $100,000 if Vaughn's proposed legislation existed at the time. But that would have also meant that developers could have destroyed precious resources without any consequences. As Lyserson says,
the legislature is in this position when this bill is in front of them of whether they're going to look out for the public good
or not. Wetlands have been estimated to be worth between $8,000 and $19,000 per 1 acre, and their single greatest value is attributed to the moderation of extreme events. For example, wetland sticky soil can reduce the speed of floods by absorbing water. Alex Pelham, Chief of Staff for the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, says a lack of legal protections will lead to more flooding.
If we're not having to study it, we're not having to permit it, I don't know that we would know what the effects are until it's too late and until we see flash flooding.
In Tennessee, we've already lost 60% of our wetlands, and they only cover a tiny sliver of our land today. Here's the recent backstory. In 1971, Tennessee passed regulations to protect water, including wetlands. The federal government passed its version, the Clean Water Act, soon after. But last year, the Supreme Court ruled that the states could decide. The federal decision didn't change anything for Tennessee, but this new bill would effectively set the state back 50 years.
I think a lot of those legal issues are going to be fought over, but in the meantime, who suffers?
Grace Stranch is the CEO of the Harpeth Conservancy. She says wetlands are like kidneys. They filter pollution from drinking water, and they lessen drought impacts. Wetlands are even described as less resplendent versions of rainforest or coral reefs, as they're teeming with life. And just like those habitats, Stranch says they're also vulnerable to permanent loss.
Once you fill and pave a wetland, it's gone.
But another good thing to know, Stranch says it's not too late, and we have something worth protecting. Tennessee has mountains, karst, and a sand aquifer. We also boast some of the most biodiverse rivers on the continent, and wetlands are connected to all of it. If we blindly cut at the threads of these systems, the web will snag. Caroline Eggers, WPLN News.
That was our environmental reporter, Caroline Eggers. Let me ask you both, what stands out to each of you from listening to that?
Hearing it back, it just brings back the fear I had that the bill was going to pass and that we were going to lose our protections for all of our wetlands in the state. And, that fear is still real right now. And, I think Caroline did a great job of really detailing what's at stake here and, who will benefit from this and how it will hurt all Tennesseans long term.
Justin?
Yeah, I think that there are several things in there that really stood out to me, and a lot of it was the biodiversity part. Because one of the questions that has come up over the last year was, the definition of high quality wetlands versus low quality wetlands. And, earlier I was talking about restoration. I was talking about how quickly things can come back And so something can be really high quality in one service, like water quality improvement. But when you think about biodiversity, it's still low quality in the biodiversity. So sometimes I think that really understanding the definition of what we're referring to as high quality and low quality is going to be really important. And then also the connection aspect of things, because a lot of this legislation is talking about isolated wetlands. And one of the things is to make sure, my job as a scientist is to put information out there. And one of the things that we really understand is that even though they may be geographically isolated away from water that is under regulation that are a water of the state water of the U.S., they're still connected underground, and they still connect as water during rainfall as water fills them up and they flow overground. So, and there's still movement in and out of organisms and nutrients and such. So they are still really well connected to the system. Plus, I really like the term "the in-between." I wrote that down. That was nice. I'll use that later.
We would like to note that the Tennessee State Energy, Agricultural, and Natural Resources Committee deferred the proposed bill to summer study, essentially stalling out the bill for last year. But it looks like lawmakers will see a similar bill during this year's legislative session. All right, so Caroline's feature addressed legislation introduced by Representative Kevin Vaughn. Representative Vaughn is a real estate broker and developer. The bill he sponsored would have made it easier for developers to build on Tennessee land by removing protections for wetlands that we've been discussing. Do you guys believe that there's a conflict of interest of a developer proposing this kind of bill?
I'm not in the legislature, and so I'm not going to speak to the rules of what they can or can't bring. But, I would hope, obviously, if you're going to make money off of a specific bill or potentially could benefit from a bill, I think that there should be some sort of regulations or standards to review that, to ensure that you're working on behalf of the whole community and not just yourself. And I'm not claiming that he's doing that. I think that those standards should always be in place.
All right, now Representative Kevin Vaughn, he was clear that he wanted to protect property rights. We have a clip of him speaking during a subcommittee hearing in February last year, explaining his motivation behind this legislation. Let's take a listen.
This is the thing that rubs me rawer than anything about this topic. It is the fact of how your land and your rights for your property are taken from you. Because think about this. It is your property, but a third party is going to tell you whether you can use it. And then, if you can't use it, then you have to pay another third party money for you to be able to use your property. That's something that just kind of just makes me want to bow up. That's the origins of where this bill came from.
All right, now, Grace, there's a lot of times we have this idea that business interests and environmental interests are at odds. One wins or the other one does. What's your response to hearing Representative Vaughn's his frustration as a property owner to having to comply with regulations that restrict what he can do on his own property?
First, I want to say at Harpeth Conservancy, we've really shown that business and environmental interests do not have to be diametrically opposed. They actually can work very well collaboratively for the best of Tennessee's future. And I agree with him that I do think private property rights are important, but those rights end at your neighbor's property or communities downstream. Tennessee waters are in the public trust for all of us. So private property owners can still choose to build on their property. They're not stopping those private property owners for building and changing their property. What they are doing is requiring mitigation, which is completely logical. If you impact our public waters, you should have to give back to the water system because it affects more than just your private property. Why should all of us have to subsidize?
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekolona. We're talking about wetlands in Middle Tennessee. How can we help preserve these special ecosystems? My guests are Dr. Justin Murdoch and Grace Strantz. Okay, now, Grace, you are dedicated, obviously, to preserving these natural resources in our state. You're also a lawyer, and you understand property rights and how they relate to conservation and preservation. So what options do people have if their property is affected by other folks' environmental decisions? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I hate to say, but most of the options that people have are going to probably be predicated on their wealth. And I say that because one of the few options that people would have is bringing a nuisance suit. Unfortunately, this suit is not fee shifting, which means attorneys don't get fees from the other side. So you would have to pay up front, probably a large attorney fees. You'd have to hire experts. It would take a really long time, most likely to settle that lawsuit if it did. So yes, some people would have abilities to bring these kinds of suits and to get their compensation. Unfortunately, again, it's an equity issue that people who don't have the resources or money won't have the ability to be compensated for the loss of their land, for the flooding, for other issues that happen as a result.
We spoke earlier about the extreme biodiversity that wetlands have, and I understand that the Duck River in our state is the third most biodiverse river in the world, which is an amazing fact in itself. How do the current regulations, how do they help protect the Duck River?
So with the Duck River, I mean, and you are correct, it is a biodiversity hotspot. I mean, it is a really great thing that the state of Tennessee has, and we can claim it all. It's one of the few rivers in the state that the whole watershed boundaries lie within the state of Tennessee. And the wetlands in this region, one of the major stressors on the Duck River is flow, is water, too much water being withdrawn to balance some of the biological needs within the system. And so what wetlands do, they do two things. One of the main things is they capture the rainfall when it's present, and then slowly releases it into the tributaries and then they flow into the duck. So it keeps a sustained flow and more consistent flow year round. And that's probably one of the biggest things that they're benefiting the river right now, relative to what one of the largest stressors of the river. And the other thing is what we talked about is that they're cleaning the water both with sediment and pesticides and nutrients that could negatively affect the water quality in the river, that then would have an adverse effect on the organisms that live in that river.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and can I say that new data has come out with this SkyTech mapping systems to show how many isolated wetlands are around our Duck River. And right now it's already on the most endangered rivers list. You know, this is a crown jewel of Tennessee. And we, by getting rid of these regulations with the massive growth that we're seeing in Middle Tennessee, could truly put the Duck River in more of a threat than it's already under right now. And so I think, you know, I like to say that the Duck River is our Dolly Parton. You know, it's everyone loves it, and we want to do what we can. And I mean, right now, Harpeth Conservancy, we're fundraising with MPT to do a documentary, which will go all over the country about the duck. So if we want to protect this river that so many of us care about, if we allow this legislation to go through, we are putting it at, if you want to talk about endangered river, let's time that by 2. Mm-hmm. What's worse than endangered? Because that's where we're at this point.
Wow. I want to talk about flooding real quick, because it's something that happens a lot in Middle Tennessee. It can happen to, you know, specific property owners, but also entire communities, as we all know. Talk to us a little bit more about the role of wetlands in flooding and what that can really look like, Doctor.
Yeah. So when we think about the most recent flooding in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, there was such a deluge that it's probably not likely that wetlands or any other man-made structure could have had a large effect on the amount of flooding in those types of situations. Where the wetlands are pretty critical as far as mitigating some of the flooding impacts or some of those middle rain events, some of those that do cause, you know, some flooding, particularly, you know, in urban areas where water doesn't have a lot of places to soak into the ground, and it flows off into the streams really, really quickly. So some of the, probably within the last 5 to 10 years, more research has come out that's been able to model, you know, how effective wetlands are at mitigating peak flood flows in large watersheds and even whole river basins. And what they're finding is that wetlands can be really effective at reducing flood flows by even several feet. But it also depends on where they're located in the watershed. Those wetlands, particularly some of those upland isolated wetlands, are more impactful at reducing flow if they're further up in the watershed and catch the water before it flows downstream. So its size, its location, and type of wetland that all contribute to their actual impact at mitigating flows. And sometimes, you know, even a couple feet can make a big difference on whether your house gets flooded or not. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we're just now really, you know, having the capabilities and the computing power and the modeling power to get a better handle on how efficient wetlands can actually be in reducing flooding.
Now, last year during a subcommittee meeting in February, Representative Kevin Vaughn responded to a lawmaker's question about whether increasing development on wetlands would worsen flooding. Let's listen.
Yes, sir. I have no concerns about this bill affecting flooding or increasing flooding opportunity.
Okay. You hear this? What do you all think?
I mean, I'm going to agree with Tima, who also testified during this hearing. I'm going to believe that our agency, who are experts in dealing with emergency situations, when they say that this is going to increase flooding, I think that we should listen to experts and the experts on flooding. And, small wetlands can absorb 50 to 70% of rainfall compared to areas without wetlands. They can reduce, runoff 15 to 30%. They can enhance soil retention by 30 to 50%, thus decrease flood peak levels by 10 to 25%. Tennessee, we are the number one most inland flooding state. Okay, great. We fight with Kentucky, so we go back and forth. But we're claiming that we're the most inland flooding state. And allowing this is just going to increase that and impact our communities who are already dealing with flooding and making it that much worse.
Now, as we mentioned, the bill did not go to vote last year. What would you both like to tell our fellow Tennesseans and lawmakers about what you hope to see happen with wetland protections if a similar bill is proposed again? Justin.
I've had some really positive interactions in the last session with several lawmakers that I got a chance to talk to, and I hope that we, that I was able to provide some information, and other groups have been able to provide information to make the best decisions. I mean, I think that I just hope that that we can get across what actually will happen when you take away some of the wetlands in different scenarios and trying to find the best solution that's gonna work for all of Tennesseans as we move forward.
Great.
Yeah, I think TDEC has openly stated that they're ready to work and fix maybe problems with efficiencies in the system. And so we shouldn't let one story or a few stories influence the protections of our wetlands across the state. Yes, we can rebuild some of them, but some of them are gone forever. And so I think, if we want this to be a really amazing state that people are coming and raising their children for generations to come, then we have to protect our natural resources. And wetlands are crucial to all of our natural resources. So I hope they will think very wisely, what legacy do they want to leave in Tennessee?
All right. Now, Justin Murdoch is an ecologist and associate professor of biology at Tennessee Tech University. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for teaching us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to me and having me here. Yeah.
Anytime, my friend. And Grace Stranch is the CEO of the Harpeth Conservancy. She's going to stick with us through the break. We're taking this one last break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about local conservation efforts for wetlands and other natural resources here in Tennessee. Stick around. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. We've been discussing the wetlands here in Middle Tennessee. Now I'd like to introduce our next guest, Latricia Adams. She is the president of Young, Gifted, and Green, an environmental nonprofit in Memphis. Latricia, thank you so much for being with us. Welcome to This is Nashville.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here. I'm just still so energized from hearing the conversation from earlier. So excited to talk about this topic with wetlands.
We are excited to have you here with us, and still with us is Grace Stranch. She's the CEO of the Harpeth Conservancy. Again, Grace, thank you for being with us for the entire episode. Really appreciate that. All right, now, Latricia, tell me a little bit about Young, Gifted, and Green and how you got involved with it.
Yeah, so Young, Gifted, and Green, we actually turned officially 9 years old on February the 10th. But our work actually got started in the wake of the Flint water crisis. So in response to the Flint water crisis, we responded like many people did in the beginning of the crisis, where we did community service outreach, water distribution, but we realized that as it relates to water quality and just overall environment at large, that there was a much bigger issue. So once upon a time, we used to be called Black Millennials for Flint. People always ask, why did you come up with that name? That's literally who came together to mobilized to support Flint, but then our work began to expand, not just to expand beyond just the city of Flint and other parts of the country, including my hometown that I adore, Memphis, but then to also be a bit more intentional and attentive to other environmental issues outside of just the parameters of water infrastructure and water quality, but essentially what's impacting our environment at large, and particularly how does it impact communities of color and communities in economic distress. So within these almost 10 years, almost a decade, our platform has really been influential as it relates to community programming, education, and awareness, but then also mobilizing residents and those individuals in frontline communities to be actively engaged in the democratic process outside of just voting, but participating in public comment, having relationships and interacting from an intergovernmental perspective has been a true conduit in the work that we do with Young, Gifted, and Green.
Now, Memphis is your hometown. So tell me this, when did you first learn about wetlands here in Tennessee?
Yeah, so I would be remiss if I did not sneak another shout out in here to Protect Our Aquifer. So Protect Our Aquifer is also an organization that was founded and based in Memphis. In addition to them protecting our aquifer and doing a phenomenal job of educating community, electeds, everybody about the aquifer, they also did quite a bit to build my knowledge and capacity as it relates to wetlands. And so I also have the esteemed honor to serve as a board member for Protect Our Aquifer, but that literally is my entry point. So even though, I'm pretty well rounded as it relates to certain aspects of environment, but I really started to build my momentum and interest and advocacy surrounding the preservation of wetlands, particularly in a place like Memphis, because of the investment and community that comes from organizations like Protect Our Aquifer. I'm happy, and I hate that I can't see you in person, Grace, but also the work that she does has really built the capacity, not just of me as an individual, but the communities that we serve as well, to truly understand how wetlands are such an integral part to our day-to-day lives and just the health of our communities and our homes as well.
I want to talk about that, wetlands and flooding and public health. How much of that is on your radar in Memphis, and considering, some of the potential hazards that the region is facing?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I think I'll hopefully be able to really paint a really good picture around connecting the dots. So one of the aspects of the work that we do with Young, Gifted, and Green is grounded in healthy housing. So we partner with other community-based organizations that actually do the labor that's associated with healthy housing. And one of those aspects is around mold, so Black mold. So when you think about the instances of flooding, and Memphis is, like many places throughout the country and the world, is having a lot of challenges with extreme weather, which includes extreme rain that leads to flooding. And so what we see on the ground is in those instances where there is extreme flash flooding in particular, it is directly impacting homes. So what we see, for example, I'll lift a real life example. There's a community in North Memphis, in the Hyde Park community, a historical Black community, where in addition to there being significant blight issues in this particular community because of historical disinvestment, there's also issues surrounding infrastructure, like with stormwater management, for example. And so there's also wetlands that's literally surrounding this particular community. But because we're seeing such an enormous influx of rain, what's happening is when it is those torrential rains, water from flooding on the streets in this particular community community literally goes up past the yard, floods out people's lawns, and comes up into the house. So goes beyond the porch and literally goes into the house. Because there's a lack of awareness around black mold in particular, we literally come into contact with families, and we're talking about families with children, women who are with child that are pregnant, other childbirthing people, where they're living in homes with black mold. Black mold is extremely lethal, and black mold, in addition to there being issues that come from flooding, that's a major issue that we don't necessarily hear a lot. So according to EPA, about 50% of homes in the United States have mold issues. And so when we think about the preservation of our wetlands and what they do to literally be our natural sponges, we have to make sure that we protect that, especially in those communities that are already exacerbated with existing environmental issues. So that issue with black mold is very prevalent. We know with black mold, it causes significant respiratory issues. It literally can kill you, not to be so morbid, but it's true. Also, if you're with child, causes significant issues with air quality, indoor air quality that can impact pregnancy. So there's a litany of public health issues that literally can come from flooding that leads to black mold, that causes a festering of sorts within a household.
Yes, thank you for that. I only have a couple minutes left, so I do want to direct people to understand how they can get involved with both of your organizations, or one of your organizations, or potentially both. Because what can folks do to make a difference when it comes to wetlands and other natural resources, when it comes to legislation, Grace?
Yeah, so I've heard from one of our other river groups something that I really love that stated that rivers have a head and a mouth, but they don't have a voice. But all of you can be a voice for our rivers and our wetlands. We are so fortunate that this is a bipartisan issue. Normally in our fractured times, there's not many things that bring people together, but this is one issue where your voices, all different voices, can come together and fight for our wetlands. We are having a Conservation Education Day on the Hill on February 25th. We'd love to discuss with you how you can get involved in this. We also co-lead legislative calls weekly around a wide range of different topics. And so I just encourage you, please reach out to Harpeth Conservancy. We'd love to amplify your voice and tell you how you can get more involved.
Latricia, same question for you. How can folks get involved?
Yeah, so echoing that of Grace, it's really important for community members and all stakeholders to do just that, to amplify their voices, to make sure that our decision makers know that wetlands are very important to us. And from a perspective of Young, Gifted, and Green, we really encourage people to really master the art of storytelling. There is no greater expert than those individuals that are directly impacted. So being able to bring personal narrative to connect it to the importance of the preservation of wetlands is really critical to ensure that our decision makers are actually representing the decisions of their constituents. Best way to remain in contact with us, we encourage folks to please follow us on social media. All our handles are the same at Young, Gifted, Green. And then also visit us online. You'll also find opportunities if you want to take action. You can learn more about those issue-based areas where you can be more engaged and amplify your voices. Our website is www.younggiftedgreen.org.
All right, thank you.
And I just wanted to jump in and say one more thing that I'd be remiss, that how wetlands impact all of you is that most of our drinking water comes from our rivers or the aquifer in Memphis, and our wetlands recharge that aquifer, and all of these wetlands purify the water so that the utilities don't have to do as much because they have natural filtration. So when you don't have that natural filtration, the utilities might have to spend more money. And you know what that means? You as ratepayers have to pay more money when you don't have these wetlands naturally filtering. So I wanted to throw that out there. And I also wanted to say outdoor recreation is a $13 billion industry in Tennessee, and wetlands are crucial to it. So if you don't think that this impacts you, it does. And so please make sure that your voices are heard and join us.
You heard it, everyone. Grace Strantz is the CEO of the Harpeth Conservancy, and Latricia Adams is the president of Young, Gifted, and Green, an environmental nonprofit in Memphis. Thanks to you both for being here, and thanks for the work that you're doing. Really appreciate it, y'all. And thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Caroline Eggers and Catherine Ceces. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operators, Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. Comment and tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message. The number is 615-751-2500. Hit us up on social media, Blue Sky, Instagram, and X at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Akolona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and be good to each other.